Looking for no bullshit conversation about mental health? Find Learn from People Who Lived It wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People Who Lived It.
Welcome to another episode of Learn from People Who Lived It.
I'm Chelsey and I'm 34 years old.
Chelsey, what story are you here to share?
I'm here to share my experience with trauma from childhood into adulthood and how it's changed the course of my path and helped me find my purpose in life. A big piece is also going to be centered around grief and loss, which mostly happened in my 20s, with the biggest loss being my 25-year-old brother.
Who do you hope hears this?
I want those who have gone through or are going through similar experiences feel less alone. I know not everyone is comfortable in sharing openly about their struggles, especially when it comes to grief. But I know just how powerful that validation and connection can be just from hearing it from someone else. And I hope it can also provide inspiration and a message to others that you can still lead a great life despite some of the cards you may have been dealt along the way.
There it is. Look at me. I've got the t-shirt on that says what she says, right? Bad day, not a bad life. Like you can go through a sequence of tough stuff and it doesn't have to be the whole game. Well, welcome to Series 3 of Learn from People Who Lived It. I am Mathew Blades. Chelsey's going to be our guest on the show today. Let's welcome in Dr. Frank Bavacqua. Hello, sir.
Hello. How are you?
I'm really good, man. Before we get into today's podcast, I do have to say that just yesterday, I got a wedding invitation from a certain somebody. And I feel like on the podcast, we should take a moment to celebrate the engagement of Frank Bavacqua. Congratulations.
Congrats.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Very exciting, man. And,
it is very exciting.
And the big date is going to be here before you know it. And we're thrilled for you, man. I'm thrilled for you personally.
Thank you.
Yeah, no sweat. Chelsey is going to join us today. And as she mentioned, it's a lifetime of abuse that starts in her childhood and then goes into all kinds of interesting areas, because in her 20s, that's when the devastation really starts to take place. And, you know, in your 20s, you might agree with me, Frank, that's really the decade of discovery. That's that decade where you're really figuring out who you are and what you're all about. And so following that, she goes through this next to life event where she loses her dream job, and then she has this car accident, but she's overcome all of it. And I would love to start with the first 10 years. But first, I would like to say welcome, Chelsey, and just kind of find out how you're doing right here, right now, on the day that we're recording this podcast, which happens to be the 1st of June.
Thank you. Yes, I am so happy to be here, and I am doing so much better. I'm going to say this is my year, and things have been going really well so far. I started a new job and at a nonprofit, and super, it's just such a great and wonderful organization to be a part of. I have lots of friends that are very supportive. I have friends from all across the US that I've never met, but because we've been in common, closed Facebook groups for grief and loss, and even car accident survivor groups, I'm doing well. And I'm doing well because of the support system that I have, but I didn't have a lot. I had to kind of seek it out. I had to, that's where I search for the different groups and things like that. I'm the kind of person where if I go through something, I need to talk to somebody else who's going through it as well, even if I don't know them at all.
Frank, we're not even 5 minutes into the podcast, and hopefully everybody's written down tool number 1, right?
Yeah. Find support. Find other people who have gone through something similar. And that's literally why we do this thing, right?
Absolutely.
There are other people who are going to have experienced things that, Chelsey's going to tell us all about, and hopefully that can make them feel a little less alone. That's a big reason why we do this.
Well, let's jump in. I'm happy that things are going really well for you. I'll tell you, I met Chelsey a few months ago at an event for Banner Health. They were having a foundation dinner, and it was the night where I was speaking, and I had said something that had clearly sent you and your friend into a space of talking about some heavy things. And then I came to learn a little bit more about Chelsey, and I said, you got to come on the podcast. best. Let's start with your first kind of 10 years of your life, Chelsey. Give everybody a little snapshot as to what it was like from 0 to 10.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Arizona. So I'm a native, which I know is rare. My parents were from the East Coast and they moved out here. And so I was born 2 years after my brother. I was born December 23rd. So I'm a Christmas baby. And I came out with a cord wrapped around my neck. So I was purple and not breathing, but thankfully everything was fine. And the following day when my parents took me home from the hospital, I think they still do it. They put me in a stocking. And so that's how I came home from the hospital, and they put me under the Christmas tree. And I'm hoping that they got me eventually. I mean, I have the photo of it for proof. I don't have any photos after showing the breed. But yeah, so my brother though was Clint. He was just obsessed, with having a little sister, like kind of older siblings are, when there's a new one that comes. And so it was, my parents ended up divorcing when I was 2. And then the last time I had seen my dad was when I was 4 years old, because he battled addiction, drugs, alcoholism. And my mom thought it was best that we weren't around that. So it was just the 3 of us. We did still stay in touch with my dad, mainly through letters. We always wanted to know him, even though we didn't fully understand the scope of why we weren't seeing him. So my mom and brother and I, we moved around several times to different apartments, and my brother and I loved moving. I know my mom didn't, but because it was a new place, and we loved sharing a room. We loved having bunk beds. Yeah. So it was just us 3. My mom worked 2 jobs. My brother and I got along best when we were up to no good, but we were very quick to blame the other. We got caught.
Right.
He was always a prankster. Yes, and even as a toddler, he just loved getting reactions from people and getting people out of their comfort zone. And probably around age 6, I started, just kind of writing to-do lists every day. And, I didn't know why. And then I started, we'll think, oh, you have to touch the doorknob 7 times, or, something bad will happen. And, obviously I learned later that's OCD. My mom had no idea. And so I didn't realize why I had all these lists I always had to keep in order. Because what 6-year-old needs a to-do list for every day?
Yeah, right.
And so it's just something that was already kind of, I think I was born with or ingrained in. So I kind of had that's when that emerged. And then around probably age 7 or so, my mom got moved into a house. She bought us a house. We're so happy. There was a man that lived next door who she knew at a prior complex, and he let her know, this house opened next door. And so she bought it. We couldn't believe we had our own rooms, and his was a foot bigger than mine. So he had more space. My mom was like, no, it's equal. I'm like, no, it's not.
It's not equal.
My mom started seeing this man next door, and very quickly he became abusive, physically, verbally, to all 3 of us. And I remember when I was 8 or 9 years old, and I was in this hotel with him and my brother, and my mom was down at the pool because we were on this vacation of some sort. And he made this spaghetti that it was so foul tasting. It tasted like a tub of salt was put in it. And I almost threw up. And he said, if you throw up, I'm going to make you get on the ground and eat it. And the fear, the terror of eating my own vomit, it was terrifying. And so my brother and I, we grew up in fear. I feel like we're always in survival mode. And when I was 13, I got caught stealing a pack of gum. And I remember my mom, she's very upset, disappointed, and, was trying to figure out what my discipline punishment was going to be. But her boyfriend was standing right next to her. And I calmly said, Mom, can you and I just talk about this one-on-one? And that's when he grabbed me by the hair, threw me up against the wall, and I went running to my room. And because I was like, I have to get the door shut, locked, barricade it, something with a dresser. And it was horrible because it felt like in a horror movie. when you're trying to, get the keys to open, a door or a car, and you can't get it quick enough. And right before I had the door shut, he busted through and just really started yelling some really just foul language at me. And, it just added more to my fear. This probably went on from age 6 to age 17. It really,
wow.
And honestly, it probably would have kept going because my mom, she stayed in it. And it was really hard when my brother and I got older, to see like our mom allowed that. This man he was just a bad man, but this was, she allowed this to happen. And that was really hard. I know my brother probably suffered the most with that, but I think
Was he meaner to your brother?
My brother did tend to get the worst. Yeah. Because he was trying to make him into a man, and putting the fear in someone to make him into a man is not from what I would think would be the way to do it.
Oh, listen, I say this 1,000 times a year because I'm a youth hockey coach, because I coach kids, and I say they're little 12-year-olds. They're not little 18-year-olds. And it's tough because even with some of the kids nowadays, they look much older than they are, but they're still just 14. They're still just 12. You know what I mean? They're still at an age where they don't have the capacity to figure all these things out. If you don't mind, Chelsey, I'd like to pause your story for just a moment and bring Frank in to just talk a little bit about something that's on my mind. She starts talking about her biological father, and he gets, into drugs and alcohol. Mom makes the decision that they're not going to be around each other. Every day this happens. Every day in our life, some mom or dad has made the choice to leave a relationship because somebody is addicted. And in her mom's case, it seems like she sort of traded one poison for another poison. I just wonder about an open conversation, even with three of us. Chelsey, you're welcome to jump in on it. But man, it's so hard to figure out what's going to be better for him, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, Chelsey, when you started that story, I mean, I've obviously talked to a lot of people personally and professionally. We've been lucky enough to interview so many people for this podcast, other episodes. And there have been so many times where a person's story involves their parent, either their parent directly kind of being a negative influence one way or another on them, or allowing a negative influence, somebody who's abusive, something like that, into that person's life, right? And your story started out with your mom being incredibly protective, right? Where your biological dad was in a place where he was, it sounded like her decision was that he was not going to be good for you or your brother, and that it was literally better off if there was separation between those two. And that in and of itself is an incredibly hard decision, but some of us looking from the outside in might think, okay, like we see where that came from. And then a couple of years later, to allow a very different type of person in, but one who objectively, I think we could all say was just kind of a negative influence. And not even like your biological dad. So it's like we didn't really owe this guy anything. Mm-hmm. Do you have any idea how your mom kind of made those decisions? Was that confusing to you? Was it confusing like, hey, we couldn't see our dad for X, Y, or Z reason, but this guy's been sticking around for a decade. Like what kind of sense did you make of that?
Honestly, because we were so young, it's like we thought it was normal. We didn't know any other example. And my mom she was very negative when she talked about my dad. And so, but we were still writing, him letters and different things like that. But it's almost like the secret of her boyfriend, we really didn't share it with anybody. A lot of our friends didn't know. It's like this hidden secret, about the man next door and this abuse that we endured. And, I think it's when I got older that's where I really reflected and thought, okay, she wanted us to shelter us from this. And I understand that. And I'm glad she did. But then she brings in somebody else and it's like, you didn't trade up. All that we wanted more than anything was a father figure. That's what we wanted. And I think, as children, as children, we believed, he would get better, or maybe we deserve this, or maybe we shouldn't have said that. And
and I'll tell you that abusive people will even use that language. I mean, I can remember growing up and hearing the words out of people's mouths, that was a beating they deserved. That was a beating you deserved. I mean, it's literally, and maybe people still feel that way. I don't know. But there's definitely a lot of folks who feel, like beatings are deserved, which is why I have Dr. Frank Bavacqua here to remind us all that once you start the physical process, you have to finish it if that's going to be your solo means of punishment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That doesn't usually end well. But the language, like adding to that language piece, the words are like, if you would only, right? If you only didn't do that, or if you would just do that, right? It's almost like you're giving the victim the illusion that they have control over this. Right. That man, if you would just listen, if you would just get better grades, if you would just clean up after yourself, if there's the illusion of control, but the reality is you can never be perfect enough to avoid that entirely. So the things going on in my head are, in theory, I think I have control over this and I am failing. Right. And so you start kind of blaming yourself, I'm not good enough to avoid this terrible thing that keeps happening to me. And so it's no longer about blaming the person who's doing the thing to you. You're blaming yourself for not being able to avoid it.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. Does that resonate with you, Chelsey?
Absolutely. Because, growing up, and even, it trickles into adulthood, just that feeling of never being enough, never feeling like you are enough, and you're kind of like, my brother and I were always trying to prove ourselves to our mom, I think it was more, we just wanted the attention. She had so much attention on him. She kind of neglected some things with us. And so if we got an A or something on a report card, I think we just always wanted to make her proud. And, because I remember hearing him say some pretty bad things about us, my brother and I, since he did live next door. I remember as children, us in the bathtub, standing up and listening, to them talk outside on his patio, in his backyard. And we had the window open and we would just together hear all the horrible things he was saying. But the biggest thing that stood out was that our mom didn't say anything. She didn't defend us. And that was what we struggled with. Why is she allowing this to happen? Look what we're going through. And it really honestly destroyed a lot of my childhood. Totally. And my brother, though, was able to later on in life disconnect and find a way to find peace, essentially. But he was studying Buddhism, and he really learned that a lot of what was done to him as a child was not his fault. It's others projecting their own suffering onto you. And I think once he realized that, but you have to process it. You can't have a childhood like that and then grow up and now everything's fine. Some of those things do obviously carry into adulthood, into your 20s. And so it ended when I was 17, and I think it would have kept going, but my mom I was sitting outside on our patio and I saw him next door beating her up in the driveway. So at 17, I run over there, and I must have been really brave because this guy was 6'4", and I went over there running to grab him because my mom was really badly injured, and he punches me in the face. And so I call 911, and so it went to court. And I'll never forget, my mom saying to me after that, why did you have to come over there? I was handling it.
Oh my God. So you're trying to help, and it's still she's finding a way that you fucked it up. You know what I mean? That's well, don't you think, Dr. Frank, that this is exactly why this kind of shit sucks so bad? It's because this poor girl has to grow up, right? She has to grow up, and every relationship that she has now is skewed because of her experience. Let me put it to people like this, because maybe you can understand it. You ever go and rescue a dog from the pen, and you get the dog home and the dog's super timid, and you call the pen and the pen says, oh yeah, it had a really abusive man for the first 2 years of its life, so it hates guys. Okay. People are just as sensitive, if not more. And so as Chelsey goes through this as a child, of course, that stuff's going to show up to your relationships. And the part that I want to talk about a little bit with you, Dr. Frank, right now is that self-esteem piece, that self-love piece, because that's missing. That's missing from her as she's coming up.
Yeah. She kind of posed the question of, I'm not sure why I did this. It could have been because of reason A A or reason B or reason C. And honestly, not knowing any more about your situation than what you've shared with all of us so far, I would put my money on a combination of all of the above. We grow up, and you kind of referenced it before, we grow up and we just kind of think certain things are normal, even if it feels off in some way. We don't know any better. We don't know any different. A lot of times, we see people tend to do one of two things. They either completely reject something that they experienced. And so in your case, you completely reject the physical abuse piece, right? You know that if that comes along, anything that looks like it, feels like it, smells like it, you are headed for the hills, right? The emotional abuse piece, you kind of got sucked in accidentally because, it was similar to what you were used to. There can be so many reasons to that. Like it literally could just be this idea that that's kind of what you were used to, and you recognized it in somebody else, but you didn't recognize kind of why it was bad, and maybe until it was too late. It could have been your attempt to I did not successfully kind of avoid the bad stuff the first time around, but I can do better this time, right? It could have been a lack of, feeling like you deserved something different or better. It can be any of those things, but it's not uncommon to see these really unfortunate patterns repeated. It sounds like this was only a one-time deal for you, though. Correct me if I'm wrong. It was one relationship. I'm not sure exactly how long you said it lasted, but it sounds like you have not had that pattern repeated again for you. Is that right?
Not in that same manner. But I did, my couple relationships after that weren't really healthy. They weren't that kind of teamwork or you each put in the effort. It was always me. And I kind of overgive. And that's something that I still try to work on. I think I overgive because I'm scared that someone's going to leave me, that abandon me. So if I give them, so much, then they'll stay. And they'll, so that's a lot of the things that I had to learn, where that's not how a relationship works. It isn't where you put in all the effort, and no relationship like that, work-wise, romantic, family-wise, that's not going to be healthy if there's only one person putting in the effort. So yeah, it happened a couple times, and now I'm in my 30s to the point where, some things I'm like, I can't blame my childhood anymore. I know, what's healthy, what's not healthy. So
did you struggle with any drinking and alcohol or drugs or anything like that as a result of the way you grew up?
See, what's weird is my brother and I didn't. And there's alcoholism on my mom's side, so we kind of got it from both sides, but we never, it was never something where, drink excessively or we were trying to ever numb our pain, now, not saying I wish I would have done that, but now I kind of understand, during childhood or teens of when they do turn to that, to try and numb their pain and stuff. But no, we just felt everything head on. We didn't really have that addictive personality, gratefully.
All right. That's a perfect place to hit the pause button. Part 1 with Chelsey is a wrap. We will get into part 2 with Chelsey as soon as you're ready. And just so you know, coming up in episode 2, she talks about losing the closest person to her in her life, her brother, and that tragic accident that took place on Camelback Mountain on May the 4th. Part 2, when you're ready.
We have 3 goals with Learn from People who lived it. 1, to help you feel less alone. 2, encourage you to seek out a coach, a therapist, a church, anyone who can help you get through your journey and find some healing. 3, when you're ready, share your story with us.
Find Learn from People who lived it wherever you get podcasts. Search it using all one word. Learn from People who lived it.
Really funny is I heard somebody talk, that dog whisperer, they talk to you have to be an amygdala whisperer. And for anybody that doesn't know that, that's the fear part of the brain. And so you have to be able to calm the fear first. And we do that by learning about what it is. It's actually not something wrong with you. It's not that you're broken. It's not that there's anything bad about you. It's just a normal physiological response, but it's on overdrive. So we got to turn down the alarm system. And the only way you do that is through safety, relationships, and calm experiences. You can't learn the self-regulation skills when you're dysregulated. You have to do them in a calm nervous system. So we're creating safety in those first 5 weeks to really be able to keep the nervous system at a good space as much as possible to learn the skills to be able to be successful. Anybody that's done this work before and tried to do it and not been successful, it hasn't been safe enough to be able to do it.